tonight the clocks will go backwards, so time is changing. So just watch that tomorrow. But our program will start at 7.
Same time, but just the word of time change. It's 7 o'clock.
رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين. أما بعد، قالوا أبا عبد الله الحسين صلوات الله وسلامه عليه: إني لم أخرج عشيرا ولا بطلا ولا مفسدا ولا ظالما، وإنما خرجت لطلب الإصلاح في أمة جدي محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. أريد أن آمن بالمعروف وأنهى عن المنكر وأسير بسيرة جدي محمد وأبي علي بن أبي طالب.
اللهم صل على محمد.
Greatest Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaykum assalam.
أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا أبي عبد الله الحسين صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. Over the last couple of nights, we have been trying to understand, in light of the prophetic model, what is the prophetic personality, what is the method of reform that our prophet took, in order for us to understand the way in which such a personality, such reformation would take place today in the 21st century, in light of the broad and varietous world that we see today. And so yesterday we came to a very important discussion, and that was trying to understand the way in which a prophet or an imam understands the principal message of the Holy Prophet of Islam and applies that in the 21st century. And yesterday we spoke about how different every part of the world is, and how in every era the world continues to evolve, every society continues to change, our appreciation for everything in society changes. And so because the world continues to change, Islam must be able to accommodate for all of those various given changes. But despite all of those changes in every country, in every region, in every community, despite that constant change, Islam must accommodate for that and continue to build the community and take it forward. And so just the way in which Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam came to a community with its own challenges, he managed to elevate them intellectually, morally, and spiritually. And so in our own given circumstances, though the circumstances have changed, the same goal is expected. that the law brings us forward intellectually, morally, and spiritually. To what end? Islam has certain aspirations. Islam has certain goals. And so every law, every facet of our existence must ultimately conform to those aspirations of the religion. What were those aspirations? For example, the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala seeks to bring liberty to the human being, seeks to liberate a human being from their own given circumstances, from their own shortfalls. The religion itself holds the sanctity of life as paramount. The religion considers the unity of humanity and the unity of sects as paramount. And so if there is a law that contradicts the primary aspirations of the religion, the primary aspirations of the religion are superior, are supreme, and so those aspirations remain, and so the law in its particularity, in its granularity, must be able to reflect the higher aspirations of the religion. And so he expressed this very succinctly by looking at one particular law of Islam and how Rasulullah implemented that law, and how the awaited savior of humanity, the master and lord of our age, Imam al-Hujjah, Ajjalallahu ta'ala would act differently with that very same law. We discussed yesterday the aspect of jizya, and we said that jizya is a tax levied upon Ahlul Kitab for two reasons. One, it is part of the economic system of Islam. The second is that it creates reciprocal rights between the various faiths so that they may live alongside each other in harmony without any friction between them. And so when someone pays the jizya, if you are a Christian or you are a Jew and you pay the jizya, you are given certain rights. You are given rights to worship freely, to build your church or your synagogue freely, to sing your hymns freely. And so you obtain these rights in an Islamic state. Now, when we look at this at face value, this law is a very good law. It makes sense. But if we were to apply it today in the 21st century in the same way, the law would have a counterproductive reaction. Instead of creating unity and harmony, it would destroy harmony within a society. Why? Because if, for example, you and I were asked to pay the jizya tax here in this country in order to be able to receive our rights, our freedoms to build a masjid, to build an Imam Bargha, to build a Husayniyah, we would say, why should I have to pay tax in order to be able to worship my God, in order to recite Da'a Kumail, in order to recite Ziyarat Ashura, in order to come here and commemorate Hussein ibn Ali alayhi salam? I would say, how dare a government impose upon me a tax to be able to worship freely? Surely I should be able to worship freely because this is my human right. This is an inalienable right that is granted to me today. And so yesterday, implementing jizya worked for the community. If Rasulullah or an Imam was to implement the same law today, it would backfire and would not yield and produce unity. And so because unity is the primary goal of Islam, a higher aspiration of Islam, what comes, a law must work within the higher aspirations of the religion itself. If we've understood this properly, if this makes sense to you and I, then we have understood fundamentally the way in which a prophet or an imam would govern us today, but also thus how we should be thinking in light of our own law. When we see ISIS and their likes chopping off limbs, stoning to death lashing, beheading, and we are disgusted with that action. We abhor that action. But the response is that this is in your book. This is in your sunnah. Why are you so disgusted with it? The answer is because we have moved on as a society. Those modes of punishment may have worked for the Arab society of the 7th century. It produced discipline. It yielded produce. It brought them forward. It managed to work in their society. But if you were to bring those same legal and penal punishments here in the United States of America, it would backfire and we would not be able to harmoniously live with those laws. It shows you that the religion itself must be able to accommodate for all types of eras, all types of thought processes, all types of cultures, all types of communities. And so whether you live in Yemen, in Mexico, in New Zealand, or in Nigeria, Islam must be able to accommodate for the way in which your community is and get the best out of your community. If the law is doing the opposite and not getting the best out of your community, not bringing you forward in intellectual movement, moral movement, spiritual movement, it cannot truly be a law from God. It is in opposition to the law of God. Now, if we've understood this, then this is how we can explain this to non-Muslims, how we can explain this to non-Shia. It's such a difficult topic, but we need to be able to understand and examine it. Now, moving forward, what does this allow us to think about? How does this help us now? Fundamentally, this makes us try to understand the way in which the Quran has always sought to be interpreted. You see, when we interpret the Quran, when we try to understand the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala relative to our time, our era, our existence, our circumstance, we ask ourselves, how does this book want to be interpreted? And so, based upon this example last night, the method used by Ahl al-Bayt, salamullahi alayhim ajma'een, is not to take and implement the literal of the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but rather was to see the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in light of the higher aspirations of the religion itself. And so the jizya was looked at not by, we must implement jizya because the Quran says it. Rather, if the jizya works for the community, we implement it. And this is the way in which the Imam would work. And so this helps us to question and truly understand the way in which the Quran seeks to be read, the way in which you and I must understand the Quran, and the way in which we can implement the Quran today in the 21st century. Now here we have to go and understand something very important as a foundation of this discussion. The whole of the universe has been created by whom? By Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Quran is thus the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And thus in no way, shape or form can these two things not be in conformity with each other at any given time. The universe is created by Allah. The book of Allah is created by Allah. The book of Allah is the repository of that knowledge, of that wisdom, of that guidance. And so at no point can these two things not be consistent with each other. The Quran must be able to reflect existence, and existence in this universe must be able to reflect the Quran at all times. They cannot be in conflict with each other. They must be in harmony with each other at every time. But now, because the existence continues to evolve, continues to change, continues to become more diverse, the Quran must also be able to evolve with those changes. But the Quran doesn't evolve, does it? The Quran remains the same Quran. The Quran is the same 6,500 verses today as to what it was yesterday when the Quran was revealed. And tomorrow, no matter how much the universe continues to evolve, no matter how much Lebanon and Venezuela and Nigeria and South Korea continue to evolve, and even eventually when we begin to take over Mars and Jupiter, no matter how much this universe continues to evolve, the Quran must continue to be able to explain that universe. But the fact that the Quran is only ever going to be 6,500 verses, that must mean that no matter how much the universe evolves, the Quran has already encompassed that evolution within its 6,500 verses. Meaning that whether I need to implement jizya or I don't need to implement jizya, how taqleed evolves and how it doesn't evolve, how things in Venezuela evolves and how it evolves in Mexico, how it continues to change in terms of our technological advancements, how it continues to change in terms of our engineering advancements, that we move to nanotechnology. However much the universe evolves, the same 6,500 verses must be able to accommodate for all of that growth, all of that evolution, all of that change in every shape and form. Now that's the reality of the Quran. The Quran and existence, as existence is, are always harmonious with each other. They are always in conformity with each other. There can never be a time when existence begins or continues to evolve and the Quran has not already encompassed that evolution in itself. Now, based upon that, we begin to see how the Quran must be interpreted. Because if the Quran is interpreted literally, then every time the universe begins to change, the Quran cannot accommodate for that change. And that's the way of Ahlul Bayt. Because every time they began to understand Rasulullah and the Quran, they could not explain it literally because the word remained the same. They needed to understand the significance of the word, what the word indicated, the depth and the layers of the word in order to accommodate for all of that evolution in engineering, in medicine, in science, in society, in economics, and in politics. And so the Quran enveloped all of those changes, no matter how much the change was. Now the Ahlul Bayt, salamullahi alayhim ajma'een, have alluded to this, A, in their statements, and B, in their practical judgments. For example, we have the narration which is mentioned to us several times in different ways, that says the Quran has layers to it. The Quran, the Zahir and the Batin, have layers to it. There are 70,000 layers to the Zahir, and there are 70,000 layers to the Batin. Which means the more you begin to uncover one, all you end up doing is going to the next layer of the Quran, and the next layer of the Quran, and the next layer of the Quran. Meaning that if there are 6,500 verses in the Quran, every one of those verses has 70,000 layers to it. No wonder it is able to accommodate for all of the evolution in economics, medicine, technology, politics, morality, spirituality, and society, because it has 70,000 layers to it that have already encompassed evolution, no matter what evolution takes place in this universe. Now, when the Ahlul Bayt, salamullahi alayhim ajma'een, say 70,000, they do not mean literally 70,000. Why? Because the Quran is the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have 6,500 verses which bear the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala confined and limited? No. Therefore, if the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unlimited, and He has placed His knowledge in the Quran is not 70,000 layers literally, it is 70,000 layers metaphorically, meaning the Quran is infinite in its wisdom. No matter what question you place in front of the Quran, no matter what challenge you put to the Quran, no matter what advancement takes to the Quran, no matter what change occurs towards the Quran has already enveloped that, because it is infinite wisdom from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, throughout the judgments of Ahl al-Bayt, salamullahi alayhim ajma'een, they demonstrated that when they understood the Quran and when they understood the Sunnah, they could not confine themselves to the literal aqwal, to the zawahir al-kalam, to the apparency of the statements, because they needed to be able to interpret and reinterpret the statements of the Quran and the Ahl al-Bayt to accommodate for the change in the circumstance. As long as they kept to the aspirations, as long as they kept to the primary goals of Islam. And so those primary goals of Islam governed their interpretation. They could never go against those primary goals. If the primary goal of Islam is to keep the sanctity of life, whenever they interpreted any incident, they could not go against the sanctity of life. When the primary goal is keeping unity of the community, they could only create an action that still conformed to the unity of the community. And this is why the Maraji' are able to also aspire to the higher goals of the religion itself. Let us just explain 2 or 3 narrations in order to be able to express this issue of how Ahl al-Bayt, salamullahi alayhim ajma'een, looked at a given incident and understood it in light of the higher aspiration and explained either the Quran or the hadith of Rasulullah in accordance with the time and circumstance. Number 1, an event, the time of our 6th Imam, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq sallallahu alayhi. The 6th Imam, may Allah bless him, is an utmost genius. Now that may be obvious, but listen to the way in which he understands Rasulullah, the way in which he understands religion, the way in which he unpacks the religion and demonstrates to you and I how we can understand the world and its changes for us. An incident, according to our scholars, which is made sahih or considered sahih in our corpus of ahadith. The Imam alayhi salam was in Hajj. And as he was in Hajj, it came to the event of the Qurban, where the sacrifice of the animals are slaughtered for the purpose of giving that meat to the needy, to the fuqara, to the poor, those people who are in need of that Qurban, as part and parcel of a celebration of the coming of the festival of Eid and the festival of Hajj. And so the event comes in Mina. Yes, those of you who have been to Hajj know that there is Mina. We sit in our tents. And there is the boundary of Mina, isn't there? There are boundaries of Mina. For example, just like you have a boundary within this particular hall, there is a certain part where you cannot go past. The 6th Imam is in his tent. He walks out of his tent. As he walks out of his tent in Mina, he sees hundreds of animals slaughtered and lying dead, their corpse, their bodies lying dead on the ground. The bodies are everywhere. Blood is everywhere. Najasat is everywhere. And so, you know, when you're in the state of ihram, you know, you can imagine the Imam is having to walk either through or past these pools of blood and all of these dead corpses, all of these dead animals. And so he turns towards his companions and he says to them, "Why are all these dead corpses outside my tent?" As in, the Shia are together. All the Shia would be around the sixth Imam, correct? You can imagine they wouldn't be elsewhere. They would be sitting with their Imam close in proximity. Their tents would be next to each other. He turns to his companions and says, why is there all this blood and najasat everywhere? Why are there these dead animals just lying and having not been given to the fuqara, not being given to those who are in needy? They're just lying there dead on the floor. Companions respond and say, Ya ibn Rasulullah, we are following the hadith of Rasulullah. Rasulullah told us that when you slaughter the animals in the Qurban, do so within the boundaries of Mina and distribute within the boundaries of Mina. And so we have followed the statement, the aqwal of Rasulullah. Listen to the response of the sixth Imam. The sixth Imam says, you have not understood what Rasulullah meant by this statement. Did Rasulullah intend that when these animals were slaughtered, that their bodies are just left lying, or did he intend for them to go towards the fuqara and the needy in the days of Hajj? Which one? He wanted it to go to those people who were needy. And so at the time of Rasulullah, in his first and only farewell Hajj, the Muslims were about 100,000. And so they were poor. There were many new Muslims. And so when you slaughtered all of your various cattle and all of your various sheep, you were supposed to give them to the Muslims from within the boundaries of Mina. But today there are more Muslims than what there were yesterday. If there were 100,000 Muslims in Mina yesterday in the farewell Hajj, today after 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, 100 years of Islam, Islam has now conquered vast lands. We are a richer community. We have so many more hundreds of thousands of Muslims to accommodate. Don't slaughter these animals and leave their corpses just lying, rotting in the heat of the Meccan sun. Go outside the boundary of Mina and give to the fuqara and give to those people who are needy. It's very simple. The higher aspiration of the law is to help those people who are downtrodden, those people who are needy, those people who are in poverty. And so the rule must accommodate for the higher goal. The rule, if it is not accommodating for the higher aspiration, is wrong. It cannot be the case. And so the sixth Imam reinterpreted the statement of Rasulullah and said, think about what you're doing. Would Rasulullah condone hundreds and thousands of dead animals lying here whilst fuqara are standing outside waiting for those very same animals? That's asraf. That's a waste. Why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala condone such an action when it's waste? There are people who are needy, go outside and give to them. It's very simple. Understand the law in accordance with your time. Understand that the law must accommodate for the given circumstance. And so it reaches to the higher aspirations of the law itself. This is one example, famous example. Another famous example comes to us from our fifth Imam, Muhammad al-Baqir, salawatullah alayhi. I ask you a question. Help me for a minute, because I am wanting to learn with you, inshallah. When you pay your khums, yes? When you pay your khums, how much khums do you pay? Explain how much? 20%. That's 1/5. The word khums in Arabic, khums, what does it represent? 1/5. And so this is a verse of the Quran, isn't it? That when we have our savings from one annual date to another, when we have that excess money, we are expected to take out 1/5 and give towards the Imam, or give towards what is required, Sahmi Imam and Sahmi Sadat. Is there anyone who has any contention to this? Is it 1/5? Okay. Do you know at the time of your fifth Imam, The fifth Imam, alayhi salam, according to Sahih narrations from our Maraji', according to narrations, changed the amount levied upon khums. There are narrations to say that he made it lower and he made it higher. At one point in time, he made the khums 1/4. At another time, he made it 1/6. But yet it remained to be known as khums. Why? Why did the fifth Imam, do this? When you and I, especially today, since post-2008 and the economic crash, we have gone through a financial crisis, correct or not? And so countries around the world have had to re-evaluate the way in which they're taxing, be it to the individual, be it to corporations, be it from abroad. They have to re-evaluate how much they are taxing in order to bring a balance back to the amount that they need coming into central government, correct or not? For example, I can only speak of the knowledge of which I have. For example, 2 years ago in the United Kingdom, there is something called VAT. Have you heard of this? VAT, value after tax. Up until 2 years ago, the tax was 17.5%. So whatever you spent, they would add 17.5% on in order to directly go towards central government. 2 years ago, in order to accommodate for the need and to be able to bring more money into central government, because there was a downturn in the economy, the government passed a law that increased VAT from 17.5% to 20%. Does that make sense to you? It makes sense, doesn't it? When you need to produce more money, you change the tax. And when there is enough tax coming in, you can reduce tax because people are going to spend anyway. Because they have the jobs. And so the tax system is not rooted in a set number, is it? It's not rooted in a set number. It can't be rooted in a set number because the economy goes up and the economy goes down. Circumstance goes up, circumstance goes down. What kind of financial director, what type of economist, what type of mind says, for all eternity, I will just set one tax figure and leave it the same because this is the number that is rooted in how I pick the number today. And so for the next 100 years, we're just going to keep to that number. No one would do it in their right minds, would they? Yes or no? No. So why do you expect your fifth Imam to do it? The fifth Imam found the Shia community in need of more from them. And so in order to raise taxes, he changed khums from 1/5 to 1/4 and said, temporarily, I need to tax you slightly more in order to deal with the projects and the poverty that is at hand. Can you see that? It is not about the open statement khums. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't care about the number khums. He cared about making sure there was equilibrium within society. The higher goal is to remove poverty. The higher goal is to ensure education. The higher goal is to ensure that you and I have the amenities that we need to live. Running water, enough medicine. When we require more money within the system, the tax becomes elevated. And so the fifth Imam understood that and raised it to 1/4. When the tax was enough, when the situation changed, when the oppression changed from Banu Umayyah, he was able to reduce it to 1/6 temporarily in order to give a tax break to those very same people. Can you see that? Now this shows us the way in which the Ahl al-Bayt, salamullahi alayhim ajma'een, understood the profundity of the Quran. Existence continues to change. Banu Umayyah, Banu Abbas, the Fatimid period, up until today, we continue to have a different society. Islam is no longer just found within Arabia and Persia. It is now within Alaska. It is now within Venezuela. It is now within South Korea. It is now within New Zealand. In order to accommodate for all of those changes, the same 6,500 verses must be understood in a way that accommodates properly for those changes in existence. It It is as simple as that. Now, having understood this, you and I need to understand how to read the Quran for ourselves. We're not talking about here as ijtihad now. I've explained to you the ijtihadi method of this hermeneutic, this thought process, this principle that we can discuss, debate, ponder over, challenge, like, dislike. We're intellectual, rational human beings. We're not here to just do wahwa. We're here to understand our religion, and try to understand the way the religion moves forward in our time, the way in which the imams govern this universe, the way in which they get the best out of us in our community. In light of that, you and I need to understand, when we read the Quran at our own individual levels, how to correctly read the Quran. You see, many of us, when we read the Quran, we just read it in order to get from A to B, to finish the Quran and close the Quran. The reality is, the marja of Ahl al-Bayt, salamullahi alayhim ajma'een, was the Holy Quran. Their point of return, their point of reference, the way in which they understood. How many times in ahadith we see that someone would come to Ahl al-Bayt and ask a question, they would respond by saying, have you not read the Quran? The answer is there. Every time a question came, have you not read the Quran? Have you not read the Quran? Have you not read the Quran? Because the Quran was the starting point for us to be able to understand everything in our religion. Our problem is, as a community, we have forgotten the reading of the Holy Quran. And so we need to understand how to extract value for ourselves by reading the Holy Quran. Let us have a look at this. Please recite 3 loud salawat, and all of us come forward. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sayyid Ruqayya, salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Understanding the Quran and its greatness, understanding the Quran and our methodology of reading the Quran today, how to best extract the lessons from the Quran at our level, being able to be immersed, swimming in the ocean, traversing the horizons of the Holy Quran. This comes to us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. And this is the greatest challenge ever made to humanity. Let me say that again. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Holy Quran produces to you and I the greatest challenge he has ever placed to humanity in this issue of how to correctly understand the value of the Holy Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says several times in the Holy Quran, we have told you everything in the Quran. We have explained to you clearly everything in the Quran. Those words. We have explained to you everything in the Quran. Now that's a phenomenal statement, isn't it? Because the Quran is very limited, isn't it? In one sense. How is it limited? It's limited primarily by language, isn't it? It's in one language, Arabic, primarily. It is limited to 6,500 verses. No more verses will ever come. It is limited that when it was revealed over a 23-year period. And so it is finite in certain ways. Yet, several times in the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that this Quran is infinite by saying, we have explained everything to you clearly within the Holy Quran. Let me give you a couple of verses in order to explain this. And we begin to understand the way in which Quran is finite and yet infinite. And thus, when we learn how to read the Quran correctly, you and I will be able to appreciate how it is truly a book to govern us in every given scenario that we undertake in the 21st century. One example, as an example, a verse from the Holy Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in chapter number 6, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ma farratna fil kitabi, ma farratna fil kitab min shay. We have not neglected anything in this book. Now in part of this verse, at the beginning of this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا مِن دَابَّةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ. There is nothing, there's no creature in this earth, be it walking on the land, or flying in the air. There is no creature in this earth إِلَّا أُمَمٌ أَمْثَالُ, except that they are an ummah like yours. مَا فَرَّطْنَا فِي الْكِتَابِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ. We have not neglected anything in this Quran. Now this statement is a profound statement. We've not neglected anything. Everything you need to know is in the Quran. You just need to know how to read the Quran properly in order to extract that lesson. We've not neglected anything in the Holy Quran. And so, several times in the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this. Let us read for you 3 more verses and see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to understand how everything is in the Holy Quran. This one comes to us from chapter number 16 of the Holy Quran, verse number 89. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَيَوْمَ نَبْعَثُ Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَيَوْمَ نَبْعَثُ فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ شَهِيدًا عَلَيْهِمْ مِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ. And the day in which we shall raise from every single community a witness to bear witness upon their own selves. وَجِئْنَا بِكَ شَهِيدًا عَلَى هَؤُلَاءِ. And we will call you, O Rasulullah, as a witness upon every other community. We're going to take a witness from every community. Musa alayhi salam will be a witness for his community. Isa alayhi salam will be a witness for his community. But then we're going to call you, Ya Rasulullah, as the witness over every one of these communities. وَنَزَّلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ تِبْيَانًا لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ. And we have revealed to you the book explaining everything clearly. Now again, I ask you a question. Has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explained everything clearly? One will say, no, he hasn't. Doesn't make sense to me. The Quran doesn't explain everything. Let me ask you a question. This is an example. Does the Quran tell you about dinosaurs? Does the Quran tell you about the ozone layer? Hold on to that thought. I'll prove that to you slightly in a bit, inshallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَنَزَّلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ تِبْيَانًا لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ. We have explained everything to you in this book. This is one verse. Another verse as an example, one chapter later, in chapter number 17 of the Holy Quran, Surah Al-Isra, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says something very similar. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَلَقَدْ صَرَّفْنَا لِلنَّاسِ فِي هَذَا الْقُرْآنِ مِنْ كُلِّ مَثَلٍ. We have explained to mankind in this Quran every kind of example. وَلَقَدْ صَرَّفْنَا لِلنَّاسِ فِي هَذَا الْقُرْآنِ مِنْ كُلِّ مَثَلٍ. We have explained in this Quran to mankind every example. فَأَبَى أَكْثَرُ النَّاسِ إِلَّا كُفُورًا. However, mankind do nothing but consent to reject that notion. SubhanAllah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually qualifies and says, I am saying this Quran has everything in it. It's infinite. But there are people that actually belie that, deny that, reject that statement. Last verse I will give you here about these series of verses. There are others as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the next chapter, chapter number 18, Surah Al-Kahf, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, again, almost identical verse, وَلَقَدْ صَرَّفْنَا فِي هَذَا الْقُرْآنِ لِلنَّاسِ مِنْ كُلِّ مَثَلٍ. Again, same statement. We have explained in this Quran to mankind every type of similitude. وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ أَكْثَرُ شَيْءٍ جَدَلًا. But mankind are most often kept to arguing with that matter. Yes, the first one is people reject this issue. Another is that they argue with this issue. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying everything is within the 6,500 verses. Because everything is within the 6,500 verses, this is the way Ahl al-Bayt were able to explain everything, because they found recourse to this book. They understood this book. They knew how to navigate through this book. They spent time with this book. They reflected upon this book. They pondered upon this book. They traversed its horizons. And so it was a guide for them in every single given situation. Now, how is it possible that this book, which is so limited, manages to have everything inside of it? In the Holy Quran, there are two types of books. When you hear the word kitab in the Quran, once kitab is Quran. Another time the word kitab is mentioned it is known as Ummul Kitab, mother of the book. Have you come across this statement? Ummul Kitab. Ummul Kitab is different. Ummul Kitab is not Kitab. Ummul Kitab is the book in which everything is written. Everything, literally everything is written. There's a hadith from our sixth Imam, Ja'far as-Sadiq, salawatullah, where he gives the tafsir of Surah Al-Qalam. What does the word qalam mean? Pen. Which pen is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking about in Surah Al-Qalam? Is he talking about Mont Blanc? Is he talking about the big pen? Yes? Is he talking about those pens that you give away, you know, when you go to your conferences and you hand out to your clients? What qalam is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaking about? The sixth Imam explains. He says, before we were created, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created a qalam, a pen, a giant qalam in the other realms. And then he said to it, write. And the pen responded by saying, Ya Allah, what should I write? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, write everything. Everything from the beginning to the end. Everything that I have knowledge of, write it. And so the pen took ink from the rivers of Jannah and decided, went and started following the command of his Lord and started writing what we know today is Ummul Kitab. This is why in the verses of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, not a leaf falls. There is no wet or dry land except that it is written in a clear book. Which book? Ummul Kitab. And so there are many verses that talk about Ummul Kitab. We have two separate books here. We have literally a book called Ummul Kitab that has literally everything written in it. Then we have Quran, which has 6,500 verses in it, and it has metaphorically everything in it. I ask you a question very simply. What is the relationship between Ummul Kitab and Kitab? How is it that Kitab has everything literally, whilst Kitab here has something in 6,500 verses, the whole of the universe in 6,500 verses? I will explain to you very simply. In our kitchens, at home, you have the answer. You know, sometimes in our kitchens, underneath the sink, we keep certain things, don't we? Amongst them, we often keep something like a funnel. What is a funnel? A funnel is wider at the mouth, and then it squeezes whatever you put into it, and it goes down like this. Correct or no? It's wider at the top. Whatever you put in, it condenses it, squeezes it. Nothing is lost. Whatever you pour at the top of the funnel, nothing is lost. Not a drop is wasted. It becomes squeezed, condensed, and comes out of the bottle. This is known as the funnel effect. Ummul Kitab has everything in it literally. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed it through a funnel effect, condensed it into 6,500 verses. And this is why when he says, Ma farratna fil kitabi min shay, we have not neglected anything from the Quran. It is because everything is in the Quran. Everything from 6,500 verses has been placed from the funnel effect of Ummul Kitab inside this one book that I hold in my hand now. Now think about this very clearly. Kitab, 6,500 verses, confined. Yes? Up here in the unseen realm is Ummul Kitab. What we just did was the thought process of going down the funnel. We squeezed down the funnel. I ask you a question. When you reflect, when you ponder, that is how you go up the funnel and you go outwards towards Ummul Kitab. This is what Ahlul Bayt did. They understood Quran. They reflected on Quran. This is what our ulama and those people who love Quran do. They read Quran. They reflect on Quran. And this is why when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ, do you not ponder upon the Quran, or are your hearts locked? He wants to unlock the Quran for you and take you from Quran to Ummul Kitab. It is simple as that. Now, if you understand this, this is the way the Quran is. This is the way the Quran always intended to be. Let me prove to you the way it works, and then we conclude, inshallah. Just like we explained Surah Al-Qalam, chapter number 50 is Surah Qaf, correct or no? It's one letter, it's Huruf al-Mutaqatta'at, yes? It's one letter. Like Alif, Lam, Mim, Ya, Sin, it's one letter, correct? Can anyone tell me what this one letter stands for? Again, a tradition comes to us from our sixth Imam, Ja'far al-Sadiq, he said that this letter, this single letter, stands for wiqaya. The letter in the middle of the word, wiqaya. Wiqaya is like a root for the word taqwa, or it's a morphemization of the word for taqwa. Taqwa we translate as God consciousness, but the root here, this root word, wiqaya, is a shield. Yes, it's like a shield. I can't explain it any better than saying you have a shield like this. Hence, taqwa is a shield from sin. So when you have taqwa, you have a shield against Satan. It's Iblis. And so, the sixth Imam said that this one letter from this Huruf al-Mutaqatta'at stands for this word, wiqaya. Said to him, Ya ibn Rasulullah, okay, and then what? What does it mean? Do you remember earlier on I asked you, are dinosaurs in the Quran? And you all said no. And then I asked you, is the ozone layer in the Quran? And you all said no. The sixth Imam said that that one letter from chapter number 50 in the Quran stands for the shield that surrounds the earth. That had it not been there, objects would hit the earth and destroy the earth. I ask you a question. What is that thing that surrounds the earth that protects us? The ozone layer. Constantly we are being struck by objects, aren't we? But because they get burnt up in the atmosphere, we don't feel it when they hit us. No damage is done, relatively speaking. How were the dinosaurs killed all those millions of years ago? What do our scientists, archaeologists, anthropologists tell us? How were they killed? By a meteorite. Ahsantum. Killed by a meteorite because it hit us. It broke through that ozone layer. The sixth Imam says, had we, you and I, in our time, in our era, not had that ozone layer, we would be destroyed by the objects hitting the earth as well. The Quran has everything in it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I have not neglected anything from this Quran. I have placed everything in the Quran. It just requires you to read it and learn it, reflect and ponder upon it, and you will understand how to implement the Quran in the life in which you lead. It is simple as that. The problem is when we read it, we want to read it so quickly. We don't want to reflect. We don't want to ask questions. We don't want to challenge. We don't want to take for our era. The last hadith, the fifth Imam alayhi salam explains this in the perfect best way. This hadith is found in Tafsir al-Ayyashi, volume 1, page 1. You can't miss it. It's not far for you to go. First page you open, it's right there in front of you. Listen to the words of the fifth Imam. If this Quran had been for a special group of people, if this Quran had been revealed only for a special group of people, when those people died, the Quran would have died with them. But the Quran moves, listen to his words, but the Quran moves like the sun and the moon. Let me explain. What happens when the sun moves? This is my hand, or anything. Yes, this is our car, this is our building. The sun rises, yes? As it rises, what's being shone upon? Which side? This side, correct? Which side is being shadowed and darkened out? This side. As the sun rises, it comes to its zenith, zawal. Which part is being shone upon? The top. Which sides are dark? These two sides. As the sun sets, which side is now being lit up? This side. The Quran moves like the sun. Meaning when the Quran goes through time, it sheds light upon different aspects. The Quran moves like the sun and the moon. What does the moon do? The moon has phases. The moon governs everything else, doesn't it? It governs our tides that come in and come out. When tides come in, it brings things in. When the tide goes out, it takes things out. The Quran moves like the sun and the moon because it also brings in new information and takes away old information. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this in Surah Al-Hijr. وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ إِلَّا عِندَنَا خَزَائِنُهُ وَمَا نُنَزِّلُهُ إِلَّا بِقَدْرٍ مَعْلُومٍ. With us, God, are all the knowledges in existence, all the treasures of everything. We reveal it in a measurement for you. Over a period of time, we continue to reveal knowledge to you. Just like engineering advances, just like medicine advances, just like science advances, just like society advances, the meanings in the Quran also advance at the same time. Existence continues to move. Quran has already encompassed the existence. The fifth Imam concludes in this hadith, the Quran moves like the sun and the moon. He continues, if anything comes into existence in this universe, it has already been encompassed by the Holy Quran.
Nare Haidari. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
Abu al-Fadl Abbas ibn Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullah wa salamuhu was created for the purpose of serving his master Hussein ibn Ali. He is Bab al-Hawaij. Tonight, our heart goes out to Iraq, our heart goes out to Syria, goes out to Palestine, it goes out to Pakistan, it goes out to Afghanistan, it goes out to Bahrain, it goes out to Saudi Arabia, it goes out to every place in the world where oppression takes place. When you shed your tears tonight for the sake of Bab al-Hawaij, Bab al-Hawaij stood against all oppression to help every child he could help. And when you cry for the severed arms of Bab al-Hawaij this evening, do not forget in your tear to pray for the modern day Sakina and the modern day Ruqayya. Because there are so many young children around the world today in oppression and in war. And there are so many young children today in poverty and disease. If only they could cry out for Abbas the way in which Sakina cried out for Abbas. If only they today could cry out for Abbas the way in which Fatima Sughra cried out for Abbas. If they cannot cry out for Abbas around the world, tonight with your tear, cry out for Abbas on their behalf. The moment Abbas was created, the moment he was born, the moment his blessed mother al-Baneen gave birth to him, he was taken into the arms of his father Ali ibn Abi Talib, and just the way in which Rasulullah cried for Hussein, the moment he entered into the arms of Rasulullah, Ali ibn Abi Talib cried for Abbas in exactly the same way. They came to him and they said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, why do you cry for your son Abbas? He said, my son's arms would be severed on the day of Ashura defending my son Hussein. In the same way that this was predicted for Hussein ibn Ali, this was predicted for Abu al-Fadl Abbas as well. When Amir al-Mu'mineen was passing from this world, he called his children to him. But he had particular love for his daughters, because a father recognizes the softness of his daughters, recognizes the way in which they are, the beauty of their hearts, and understands that the oppression that comes to a woman is not one that should come in that way. They are delicate, they are flowers. Imagine the flower that is the daughter of Batul. Imagine that flower that when Amir al-Mu'mineen turned to her on his deathbed and said, "Oh, my daughters Zainab and Kulthum, a day will come when you will return back to these streets, paraded as captives, not just captives, but they will treat you just like you are the Jews and the Christians of this ummah. Not just that, they will hurl stones at you. Not just that, they will mock you. Not just that, they will try to sell you as slaves. Not just that, when you enter into Damascus, they will throw fire and boiling water at you. What will happen on this day?" They could not respond but by saying, "Oh, Amir al-Mu'mineen, we will bear patiently." Zainab, she is narrated to have said, "Oh, Abbas, I never understood how we could ever return as captives to Kufa whilst you were still alive to protect us. But now I see you entering into the battlefield. I now realize how we will be taken as captives. I now understand the day will come when our hijab will be snatched from us. We will have Sakina that is slapped across our face. I now understand how this will happen because you are entering into the battlefield." Abbas cannot bear the cries of the children. You can imagine, we are told in the books of the Maqatil, we are told that there is a tent, a specific tent, where they used to keep each and every mashk, where they used to keep this small bottle in order to keep their provisions. I can imagine Ruqayya going into that tent and looking and opening every single one of those bottles and turning it towards her lips and not a single drop coming out. Trying to take this bottle towards Asghar and saying, "Asghar, let me tip every one of these bottles into your mouth that maybe you will get a drop of water." But I can also imagine the cry that she must have made when no drop of water came out from that particular bottle. They would cry out, "Al-Atash, Al-Atash." It was that cry that ripped the heart of Abu Fadl al-Abbas. This was the cry that ripped his heart open, that he could not bear to hear these cries anymore. And so he went to his brother and master, "Oh, my master Hussein, I cannot bear to hear the cries of the children. They are coming to me and asking for water. Please allow me to go and enter into the battlefield so that I may go and get water." Imam al-Hussein, listen to this response. How heartbreaking this response is. Hussein turns towards his brother and says to him, "Oh, Abbas, if you go into the battlefield, who will be my standard bearer? If you go into the battlefield, who will there be to command my army?" Abbas takes the hand of his master, points it into the battlefield and says, "My brother, look into the battlefield. There is none left but you and I. Everyone else has already been martyred. Master, which army are you talking about? I am the last. Please allow me now to go and give my life for you." Hussein turns to him and says, "Oh, Abbas, I allow you to enter, but I want you to go and get water." And this time it comes to him that his father on his deathbed calls Abbas towards him and says, "Abbas, there will come a time when you will reach the river Furat. When you put your hands in that cold, cool water, do not quench your thirst. Remember the thirst of your master Hussein. Remember the thirst of Sakina. Remember the thirst of Rabab. Remember the thirst of Asghar before your own thirst." Abbas ascends that horse. It is said before he enters into the battlefield, the hadith says, he kisses the forehead of his master Hussein. Why does he kiss the forehead of Hussein? Because in a few more minutes, it will be a rock that is hurled at the forehead of Hussein, splitting that forehead open. And who will be there to wipe the blood up? There will not be anyone to wipe the blood up. My master, let me kiss you on the forehead before you enter into the battlefield. He ascends the horse. The narrations tell us that he is such a giant of a human being that his feet are dragging across the ground. He enters into the battlefield and has a spear with him. The hadith tell us that there are 6 waves of attack upon Abbas. Each one of them fail. Abbas does not have a sword. By God, if Abbas had a sword, none of the army would have ever been remaining. He has the spear and he is pushing them back. He has the mushk with him. He arrives towards the river Furat. He descends into the water. He places the water into the mushk and ascends back onto his horse with his alam. I imagine that the children would have been waiting, seeing this event. You can imagine Sakina standing outside that tent, seeing the alam going towards the river Furat. And when it begins to return back from the Furat, she has her hope. She begins to think, now our thirst will be quenched. You can imagine that she would have run towards Asghar and said, Asghar, I have seen the alam of Abbas returning. You must wait only a minute longer. Abbas will have water to quench your thirst in a few minutes. Oh, Sakina, this is not to be the case. The enemies call out, do not allow the water to return back towards the tents, because if they have water, there is no chance of stopping Abbas and Hussein. At all chances, stop that water from reaching the tents. At this moment, they begin to strike Abbas in every single way that they can. He begins to defend himself, but eventually, as he takes the path back towards the camp, he is surrounded by trees of Karbala. It will be these trees that the enemies, the cowards, are hiding behind in order to strike Abbas down. One man comes from the right and begins to take the sword. As Abbas rides past him, he severs the arm of Abu Fadl Abbas. The arm falls towards the ground. Another man comes from the left and severs the arm of Abbas. Abbas places that mushk in his mouth. I will return back to the tent. I must look after the thirst of Sakina. He continues to ride. They continue to shout out, do not allow any water to reach the Thames. It is said that Hurmala takes a number of arrows. He is the expert marksman. This is the same Hurmala that when Mukhtar al-Thaqafi caught him, he asked him, how many arrows did you strike on the 10th of Muharram? He says, I struck the arrow that hit the neck of Asghar. I struck the arrow into the heart of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. And I struck the arrow into the eye of Abu Fadl al-Abbas. And I struck the arrow that went into the marsh that severed the water onto the plains of Karbala. I pulled back the arrow. It flew into the air. It struck the marsh. The hopes of Abbas were severed at that moment. The water falls towards the ground. They continue to strike him with arrows. A person comes and strikes Abbas with an arrow into the eye. He loses his eyesight. At this moment, they begin to surround him. They begin to strike at Abbas. The hadith says that when Abbas falls, it is not just Abbas that falls. He is cut into pieces and pieces. Abbas, the giant of the human being, falls into pieces on the floor. One narration says that an alim recites this maqtal, and then at night he falls asleep. In the dream he sees Fatima al-Zahra. Fatima al-Zahra comes to him in the dream and says to him, oh Shaykh, you recited the maqtal of my son Abbas. Listen, my son Abbas, this is not just anyone's son. This is the son of Fatima al-Zahra that is about to fall to the plains of Karbala. She says, you recited recited the maqtal of my son Abbas, but you did not recite the greatest tragedy of what happened to my son. The Sheikh says, but I recited that he went to the water and remained thirsty. Fatima says, this is not the greatest tragedy to befall my Abbas. But I recited that the mashk was split open. She says, this is not the greatest tragedy to befall Abbas. I recited that his arms were severed. This is not the greatest tragedy. Oh, my dear Lady Fatima, what is the greatest tragedy to have befallen your son Abbas? She says, when my son Abbas fell from the horse, every other one of the martyrs, they had their arms to break their fall. This was the martyr that did not have his arms to break his fall. He fell towards the ground. His eye, he continued to have that arrow in his eye. As he fell towards the ground, he fell face first. What happened to the beautiful face of Abu Fadl Abbas? Abbas, he falls towards the ground. Alaykum minni salam. Accept my final salutation. Brother, come to my aid. Hussein cries out, now my back has been broken. Ah, Abbas, after you, what world is there for me? He rushes towards Abu Fadl. He sits down beside Abu Fadl. He looks at his dear brother. What does he see but the eye? What does he see but a man without arms? What does he see but a man chopped into pieces? At this moment, he gently picks up the head of Abbas and places it into his lap. He begins to stroke his head. Abbas begins to cry. He says, oh my dear brother Abbas, why do you cry? Listen, even in the final moments of Abbas, he still remembered his brother Hussein. He turns towards his master. My master, right now my head is in your lap, but in a few minutes, your head will be on the spear. I cry for you because who will be there to lift your head but Shimmer bin the Joshan? I cry for you. My head is in your lap, but in a few minutes, where will be your head? At this moment, we hear from our Khataba that the dialogue continues. He says, oh my dear master, oh my dear brother, I have a single last request for you. He says, what do you want from me? He says, please, oh my master Hussein, I do not want my body to be taken back towards the tents. Why? I had promised Sakina. I had promised Sakina water. I feel embarrassed if I was to return without that water. Please do not allow me but to stay here. Hussein says, I will listen to your request, but my brother, I have one request for you. All your life you have called me master. All your life you have referred to me as Mawla. I want you to refer to me as Bayha. Refer to me as Akhi. Please, this is my last wish. Embracing Abbas. Abbas looks towards his brother and says, I bid you farewell, my brother. Abbas lets out a final groan of pain. His soul is taken from him. His thirst is quenched by Jibreel, by Rasulullah, by Fatima al-Zahra, by Ali ibn Abi Talib. Hussein cries out, Abbas, wa Abbasa. He returns back towards the tents. Who is there to greet Hussein but Sakina? Sakina runs out. Oh my father, what news do you have of my master? What news do you have of my uncle Abbas? Where is my Abbas? Where is my Abbas? Oh, he can respond by saying, Sakina, the arms of Abbas lie by the banks of the river Euphrates. The poets tell us that Sakina would have responded by saying, "Oh my father, I would not ask for any water again. All I want is my uncle Abbas to come back. I would prefer him to come back." Sakina, Abbas cannot bear to see what is about to happen to you in the evening, when your clothes are set alight, when your earrings are ripped from your ears, and when you are slapped across your chin. سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون وقاتلا في سبيلك واغفر لنا ما في حسين يا حسين
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Abbas, Ya Sakina, 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 Ya Abbas. दारे वफा बाजू कटाने वाले ऐ अलमदार 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 वफा बाजू कटाने वाले गए खुदी तेरे परचम को झुकाने वाले ऐ अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले ऐ अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले गए खुदी तेरे परचम को झुकाने वाले ऐ अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले ऐ अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले आज जिन हाथों ने मशकी से मैं भरी है परात आज जिन हाथों उठाने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले। झुक गए खुद ही तेरे परचम को झुकाने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले। तुझको दरिया की नमाज़ी का सलाम आया है, तुझको दरिया की नमाज़ी का सलाम आया है। खून पानी के बस अपना बहाने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले। झुक गए खुद ही तेरे परचम को झुकाने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले। पंजतन तुझ पे करम अपना करेंगे हरदम, पंजतन तुझ पे करम अपना करेंगे हरदम। जमे हज़रते अब्बास उठाने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले। झुक गए खुद तेरे परचम को झुकाने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले। हम पे हंसते हैं तेरे कत्ल में शामिल थे जो लोग, हम पे हंसते हैं तेरे कत्ल में शामिल थे जो लोग। इस पे रोते हैं तेरी याद मनाने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले। झुक गए खुद तेरे परचम को झुकाने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले। सरकलम हो गया इस्लाम बचाने के लिए, सरकलम हो गया इस्लाम बचाने के लिए। ऐसे होते हैं मोहम्मद के घराने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले। आज दिन हाथों ने मस्जिद में भरी है फरार, आज दिन हाथों ने मस्जिद में भरी है फरार। वही बात थी खैबर को उठाने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले, है अलमदार वफा बाजू कटाने वाले। Sakina, Ya 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 Sakina, Ya
Where's my Abbas? 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 Abbas, you're my uncle. Abbas, you're my brother. Abbas, you're my son. Like here there was no mother. You search so little water. You search so far and wide. Like for your brother's daughter. And you're so very wide. Where is my Abbas gone? 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 You hear the thirsty children. You hear the men you hurt. Your open soul is dipping. So you ride off to the ground. Your brother was your master. Before you never think. The rod you of a smasher. Right, you only take. Where's my Abbas gone? Where's my Abbas gone? Where's my Abbas gone? Where's my Abbas gone? Thirst, how it pins up, you hear it in your mind. Allah gosh, Uncle Abbas, why were they so unkind? Your mouth is full of water, to keep us together sane. You're looking for her daughter, but you never see her again. Where's my Abbas gone?
Where's my Abbas gone? Where's my Abbas gone? Where's my Abbas gone?
Till the 6 was silent, go to the little water. The hat of the and river, the earrings are gone. She asked her eldest father, where's my Abbas gone?
Where's my Abbas gone? Where's my Abbas gone? Where's my Abbas gone? Where's my Abbas gone?
Then I went to brother, the one who stood by you. His heart was like my father, his heart was pure and true. Go up to the river, go there and you will know. For there is good and Savior, but third and all alone.
Where's my Abbas gone? Where's my Abbas gone? Where's my Abbas gone? Where's my Abbas gone?
Moses was thirsty, he was kind of thirsty for Abbas. He rode out to the river, but didn't have breaks as fast. The same had water, and her prayers was so dry. The Abbas was out of water, but the battered die.
Where's my Abbas gone? Where's my Abbas gone? Where's my Abbas gone? Where's my Abbas gone?
The Abbas is such a brother, he shows us qualities. The baby every mother, the patience of Ali. The word is so much suffering, there is so much wrong. Now we are happy, where's my Abbas gone?
Where's my Abbas gone? Where's my Abbas gone? Where's my Abbas gone? Where's my Abbas gone? Where's my Abbas gone? Where's my Abbas gone? Ya Sakina, 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 Ya Sakina.
العبرة حسين قتيل العبرة
حسين
قتيل العبرة
حسين
عزيز الزهرة
حسين
عزيز الزهرة
حسين
عزيز الزهرة
حسين
حسين يا مولاي يا مولاي يا مولاي حسين
يا مولاي يا مولاي يا مولاي
حسين
يا مولاي يا مولاي يا مولاي
حسين يا مولاي يا مولاي حبيب الغالي حبيب الغالي عشق دلالي عشق دلالي منو اللي غيره منو اللي غيره عزيز الزهرة عزيز الزهرة حسين يا مولاي
يا مولاي يا مولاي حسين يا مولاي يا مولاي يا مولاي
طبيب روحي طبيب جروحي
حسين
سكنت بروحي
حسين
سكنت بروحي
حسين
عشت بالذكرى
حسين
عشت بالذكرى
حسين
عزيز الزهرة
حسين
عزيز الزهرة
حسين
حسين يا مولاي
يا مولاي يا مولاي حسين يا مولاي يا مولاي يا مولاي
حسين يا مولاي
يا مولاي
حسين يا مولا يا مولا يا مولا ايش كثر الاموني كثر الاموني يا نور عيوني يا نور عيوني محبة جمرة محبة جمرة عزيز الزهرة عزيز الزهرة حسين يا مولا يا مولا يا مولا حسين يا مولا يا مولا يا مولا عشق وجداني عشق وجداني جرب شرياني جرب شرياني جرب كل قطرة جرب كل قطرة عزيز الزهرة عزيز الزهرة حسين يا مولا يا مولا يا مولا 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 يا نور دروبي يا نور دروبي تظل محبوبي تظل محبوبي وهب لك عمره وهب لك عمره عزيز الزهرة عزيز الزهرة حسين يا مولا يا مولا يا مولا حسين يا مولا يا مولا يا مولا شغل افكاري شغل افكاري يسر الباري يسر الباري يا دار وسره يا دار وسره يا دار وسره عزيز الزهرة عزيز الزهرة حسين يا مولا يا مولا يا مولا حسين يا مولا يا مولا يا مولا فديتك عمري فديتك عمري وهبتك نحري وهبتك نحري هاتين العبرة هاتين العبرة عزيز الزهرة عزيز الزهرة عزيز الزهرة حسين يا مولا يا مولا يا مولا حسين يا مولا يا مولا يا مولا يا حسين يا حسين 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 حسين
حسین امر دادم خسته بابا جون از ازل بردن و رفتن پیش اون شده شیرین تر از عسل بشنو صدا ناله یه خرابه پر ناله بشنو صدا ناله خرابه پر ناله به دلاشو ناشکسته به دلاشو ناشکسته بی بلای یه سه ساله بی بلای یه سه ساله اومدر ناله کشیده اومدر ناله کشیده زنده موندنش محاله زنده موندنش محاله ای صدا میزنه اون وای خدایا ای صدا میزنه اون وای خدایا همه جون بگو بدونم همه جون بگو بدونم کجا رفته بابا جونم کجا رفته بابا جونم اونموی پهلوونم اونموی پهلوونم از چرا نمیشنوم من از چرا نمیشنوم من صدای ناله اسکر از چرا نمیشنوم من صدای ناله اسکر نکنه اونم شده شهید بی‌سر نکنه اونم شده شهید بی‌سر